Cowboy was only cleaning her wound. Then his hand slipped somewhere it never should have. Dust floated lazily in the warm evening air, and the soft sounds of horses grazing nearby filled the quiet countryside. It was the kind of place where life moved slowly, where the rhythm of nature decided the pace, and where people worked hard from sunrise to sunset. Among them was a cowboy named Jake, a man known across the nearby towns for his steady hands, calm voice, and a heart that cared more than most people realized. Jake had spent most of his life on this ranch. From the moment he could walk, he had been learning the ways of the land, the care of animals, and the endless chores that came with keeping a ranch alive. His hands were rough, calloused from years of work, but his touch could be gentle when it mattered most. He had a reputation for being reliable, for helping anyone in need, and for staying calm even when the unexpected happened. That evening, Jake was finishing his usual rounds, checking on the horses and making sure the fences were secure. The wind whispered softly through the grass, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and hay. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful, but Jake knew better than to let his guard down. The ranch was big and accidents could happen in a moment, even in the calmest of settings. A sudden shout broke the quiet. It wasn't loud, but it carried enough urgency to make Jake's heart skip a beat. "Help, over here!" He turned instantly, scanning the fields. There, not far from the corral, he saw her. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, was struggling to stay on her feet. Her hands were on her knee and she was breathing hard. Her face was pale and her eyes were wide with surprise and pain. It didn't take Jake long to realize she had fallen. Something had tripped her, maybe a hidden rock, maybe the uneven ground, and she had landed hard. Jake ran toward her, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust with every step. He could see that her leg had a scrape and a trickle of blood was running down. Not a dangerous wound, but enough to need attention. "Hey, are you okay?" he called, kneeling beside her. His voice was calm but firm, like it could hold back any panic that might rise. She tried to smile, but it came out shaky. I think so. Just a little scraped up," she said. Her voice was soft, almost trembling, but there was a hint of determination in her tone. She wasn't the type to cry over a small injury, and Jake could see that. "Let me take a look," Jake said gently. He pulled a small first aid kit from his bag, the one he always carried on the ranch just in case someone got hurt. Opening it, he took out a clean cloth, some antiseptic, and a bandage. The smell of alcohol and the clean scent of gauze filled the air as he prepared to clean the wound. She flinched slightly when he touched her leg, and Jake immediately noticed. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to make sure this doesn't get infected." Her eyes met his for a brief moment, and there was a flicker of trust there. She nodded, allowing him to work carefully. Jake's hands moved with practiced skill, gently cleaning the scrape and making sure every bit of dirt was removed. He worked slowly, not wanting to cause more pain than necessary, and she tried to stay still, feeling the sting but knowing it was for her own good. As he cleaned the wound, Jake noticed the small details about her. The way her hair fell in soft waves around her face, the slight trembling of her hands, the way her breathing was uneven but steadying. She wasn't just someone who had fallen. She was a person who had experienced fear and pain and was trying to face it with courage. And Jake felt a sense of responsibility, a need to protect her, even if only for this moment. "Almost done," he said quietly. "Just a little more and we'll have you patched up." She tried to laugh, a small, shaky sound. "You make it sound so easy," she said. Jake smiled, though his focus didn't waver. "It's all about taking your time and being careful. You can't rush these things." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ranch. The golden light highlighted the dust in the air, making it look like tiny sparks floating in front of them. For a moment, everything else disappeared, the horses, the fences, the distant mountains. It was just the two of them connected by this simple act of care. Then, without warning, something happened. Jake's hand slipped, not in a way that caused harm, but enough to brush her arm accidentally. Both of them froze instantly. The touch was unintended, but it made the air between them feel different, charged. She pulled back slightly, her eyes wide, and Jake felt a flush of embarrassment. I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I didn't mean." His voice trailed off and he shook his head. "It's okay," she said quickly, trying to ease the tension. She smiled, though it was a little awkward. "I know it was an accident." Jake nodded, still focused on finishing the wound care but now more aware of the tension in the air. He applied the bandage carefully, making sure it was snug but not too tight. "There," he said finally, standing up and brushing the dust off his jeans. "All done. You should be fine now, but try not to run off again." She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to brighten the fading sunlight. "I'll try," she said, glancing at him with a mix of gratitude and something else she didn't quite understand. Jake smiled, a little awkwardly himself. He had spent years around people, but there was something different about her. Something that made him more aware of his actions, more careful with his words. He packed up his first aid kit and stood beside her, looking out over the ranch. For a while, neither spoke. They just watched the horses, listened to the wind, and let the quiet settle around them. It was a simple moment, but it felt significant. The accident had brought them together, even if just briefly, and there was a sense that something had shifted. Finally, she spoke. "Thank you, Jake," she said softly. He nodded. "Any time. That's what neighbors are for, right?" She smiled, and for a moment the embarrassment of the earlier slip faded. There was only the warmth of the evening, the gentle strength of the cowboy, and the feeling that, even in a world full of accidents and mistakes, there were still people who cared enough to help. As the sun disappeared completely behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jake helped her to her feet. She stood carefully, testing her leg, and then gave him a nod of reassurance. "I think I'll manage from here," she said. Jake watched her walk toward the house, the bandage secure and the pain slowly easing. He felt a strange mixture of relief and curiosity. Something about her had caught his attention, something more than just the need to help. And though he didn't know what the future held, he knew that this small, unexpected encounter had left a mark, not just on her knee, but on both of them. The ranch settled into evening calm. The horses moved slowly, the wind whispered through the grass, and the first stars began to twinkle in the sky. Jake returned to his chores, but his mind lingered on the young woman, on the accident, and on the brief, electric moment when life had surprised them both. It was just the beginning of something, though neither of them could yet see it. And in that quiet, golden light, a story had already begun, one that would test their patience, their courage, and their hearts. The next morning arrived with a gentle breeze and the soft glow of sunlight spilling across the ranch. Jake was already up, walking among the horses and checking fences. Life on the ranch was never quiet for long, and he had a long list of chores waiting. Yet, even as he moved from task to task, his mind kept drifting back to yesterday evening. The memory of the young woman's fall, her wide eyes, and the accidental brush of his hand lingered in his thoughts. He shook his head slightly, trying to focus on the chores. Accidents happened. That was all. And yet there had been something about the way she had looked at him, a mixture of trust, embarrassment, and something softer, something he couldn't quite name. Meanwhile, she woke up in the small guest cabin near the main house. Her leg throbbed just a little, a reminder of yesterday's fall, but the pain was manageable. The bandage Jake had applied was still secure, and she flexed her toes gently to test her leg. "I can do this," she whispered to herself, smiling despite the slight soreness. She knew she needed to get back to her work around the ranch. There were tasks waiting, feeding the smaller animals, checking the garden, and helping with the daily chores. But she also knew she needed to be careful. A second fall was not something she wanted to experience. When she stepped outside, the morning air was crisp and filled with the scent of fresh hay and earth. The ranch was alive with movement. Chickens pecked at the ground, horses neighed softly, and the gentle rustling of leaves created a peaceful backdrop. Jake was already in the distance, tending to a fence post. Seeing him reminded her of yesterday, and she felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. Jake noticed her as soon as she appeared. "Morning," he called out, his voice steady and friendly. He smiled, though there was a hint of something in his expression that made her feel slightly self-conscious. "Morning," she replied, trying to sound casual. Her hands rested on her hips as she surveyed the area, pretending not to notice the slight tension between them. For a few minutes, neither spoke much. They worked silently, each occupied with their tasks. Jake repaired a broken fence, hammering carefully while keeping one eye on the young woman. She gathered hay for the smaller animals, making sure to move carefully and avoid twisting her leg. Then it happened. A sudden movement startled one of the horses near them. It whinnied loudly and stepped backward, kicking up a small cloud of dust. Jake instinctively moved closer to protect the young woman, but in doing so, his hand brushed hers as he steadied the frightened animal. Both froze for a moment. Their eyes met, wide with surprise, and the air between them seemed to shift again. This time it wasn't just an accident with a wound. It was an accidental contact that neither of them had expected. Jake immediately pulled back, his face turning slightly red. I didn't mean to," he started, but she raised her hand in a small gesture to stop him. "It's okay," she said quickly, trying to keep her voice calm. "Really, I know it was an accident." Jake nodded, though he could feel his heartbeat quickening. There was an awkwardness now, a tension neither could ignore. Yet underneath it, there was also a strange comfort, a silent acknowledgement that they were aware of each other in a way that went beyond the ordinary. They returned to their tasks, but the world seemed a little sharper, a little more alive. Every movement, every glance felt charged with a quiet energy. It was as if the ranch itself had paused for them, holding its breath, waiting for what might happen next. As the morning progressed, Jake decided it was time to lighten the mood. "You handled that better than I expected," he said with a small smile, nodding toward the horse that had caused the sudden stir. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I've had my share of surprises before," she replied, "but I have to admit that one was a little intense." Jake chuckled, a deep sound that seemed to fit perfectly with the open fields around them. "Yeah, animals have a way of keeping life interesting." The conversation eased the tension slightly, but neither could completely shake the memory of their accidental touch. It lingered like a shadow, subtle but impossible to ignore. Later, during a break for water, they sat on a fallen log near the edge of the field. The sun was climbing higher now, casting warm light across the rolling hills. The young woman took a sip from her canteen, while Jake watched her carefully. There was something about these quiet moments that made words unnecessary. They could just be present with each other, letting the silence speak. "You're really good with the animals," she said finally, breaking the comfortable quiet. Jake shrugged modestly. "I've had a lot of practice. Growing up on this ranch, you learn a lot about them." "I can see that," she replied, "and it's not just about skills. You have a way of calming them down, even in moments that could be dangerous." Jake looked at her, surprised by the observation. "I guess I just try to pay attention. Animals respond when you do." She nodded thoughtfully, her gaze drifting toward the horizon. "Kind of like people, I suppose," she said quietly. "Sometimes all someone needs is for someone else to pay attention." Jake considered her words. There was a depth in her voice, a subtle understanding that went beyond simple conversation. He realized that this was part of what had drawn him to her yesterday. The way she handled herself even when in pain. The way she looked at the world with eyes that saw more than most. Their conversation drifted into lighter topics then, about the ranch, the weather, and the little oddities of life in such an open place. Yet underneath, Both were aware of the undercurrent of tension, the memory of yesterday's fall and the unexpected brush of hands this morning. It was a quiet dance, a delicate balance of curiosity, attraction, and respect. By midday, the sun was high, and the work on the ranch became more intense. The heat pressed down on them, and the smell of hay and dust mingled in the air. Jake noticed her slowing down slightly, her movements careful to avoid any strain on her leg. Without saying a word, he moved closer to her side, ready to assist if needed. "You're looking out for me a lot today," she said with a small smile, noticing his attention. "Someone has to," he replied simply, though there was warmth in his tone. "And besides, I know you'd do the same for me." The small acknowledgement of mutual care made them both pause, though neither said anything more. Actions, after all, often spoke louder than words. As the day wore on, the young woman began to feel more comfortable. The initial embarrassment of yesterday's accident and this morning's hand brush started to fade. Instead, there was a growing sense of trust, of companionship. They worked side by side, sharing the labor and occasionally exchanging words or laughter. And yet, there was always that unspoken tension, a subtle awareness of each other's presence. Every glance, every small movement carried weight, hinting at feelings they were both beginning to notice but not yet ready to name. By the time the afternoon shadows stretched long across the ranch, they had finished most of the day's work. Both were tired, sweaty, and covered in dust, but there was a quiet satisfaction in their shared effort. They had faced the challenges of the day together, and in the process, something unspoken had grown between them, a sense of connection that went beyond simple friendship. As they walked toward the barn to gather the tools, the young woman stumbled slightly on a loose stone. Jake's hand shot out instinctively to steady her, and for a moment their fingers brushed again. Neither pulled away immediately this time. The touch was brief, but it carried a weight that both could feel. "It's okay," she whispered, smiling softly. "I'm fine." Jake nodded, his own smile quiet but genuine. "I know, just being careful." They reached the barn, storing their tools and preparing to feed the horses before the evening. The sun was beginning to lower again, painting the sky in warm shades of gold and pink. The day had been long, filled with work, tension, and small moments that hinted at something more. As they paused for a final moment near the fence, watching the horses move calmly in the field, Jake realized something. The accidents, the slips, the touches, they were not just mistakes. They were moments that revealed care, trust, and something deeper growing between them. And though neither could put a name to it yet, both knew that the day had changed something in their relationship. The ranch settled into evening calm once more. The sun dipped behind the distant hills, the sky deepened to shades of purple and orange, and the first stars began to appear. The young woman looked at Jake, feeling a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something that neither of them fully understood. And Jake, standing beside her, felt the same. He knew that the events of the past 2 days, the fall, the wound, the hand slips, were just the beginning of a story neither of them could have predicted. A story that would test their patience, their courage, and their hearts. But for now, in the soft light of the evening, there was peace, trust, and a quiet connection that promised more. The next morning on the ranch brought a cool breeze that swept across the fields and rustled the leaves of the tall oak trees near the farmhouse. The sun rose slowly, casting a soft, golden light over the wooden fences and grazing horses. Life on the ranch was never quiet for long, and today was no exception. Jake was already awake before the first light, moving through the stable and checking on the animals, as was his habit. The early morning air smelled of hay, earth, and dew, a combination that always made him feel alive. Despite his focus on the chores, his thoughts kept drifting back to the young woman. Her fall, the scrape on her leg, and the brief accidental touches that had left both of them feeling startled still lingered in his mind. He tried to push the thoughts aside. After all, accidents happened. but he couldn't deny that there was something about her that had captured his attention. Something gentle yet strong, something unspoken but present in every glance and every gesture. The young woman was already awake as well, stretching carefully in the small cabin near the barn. Her leg was feeling better, the bandage holding firm, though she was still cautious with every step. She had spent the night thinking about the events of the previous day, recalling Jake's calm, steady presence and the way he had handled her injury. There was a warmth in his manner, a kind of quiet strength that made her feel safe, even in the midst of discomfort or embarrassment. She stepped outside, taking in the crisp morning air. The ranch was alive with the sounds of early activity, the clatter of the horses' hooves, the soft cooing of the pigeons in the barn, and the faint call of distant birds. Jake was already moving through the fields, carrying tools and checking the fence lines. She watched him for a moment, noticing the way he moved confidently, yet with careful attention to every detail. There was a certain grace in his work, a balance between strength and precision that she couldn't help but admire. Jake noticed her as soon as she appeared. "Morning," he called out, his voice warm and steady. He smiled, though there was a slight awkwardness in the expression that made her heart beat a little faster. "Morning," she replied, trying to sound casual, though she felt her cheeks flush. She adjusted the strap of her bag and started toward the barn, hoping to distract herself with the work that awaited her. They worked side by side for a while, performing their chores with quiet efficiency. The young woman fed the smaller animals, while Jake checked the fences and ensured the horses were calm. Every now and then, their hands would brush accidentally while passing tools or handing buckets. Each time they both froze for a fraction of a second, a spark of awareness passing between them. The first true challenge of the day came when one of the horses, a large chestnut mare, grew restless. Its ears twitched, and it pawed at the ground, sensing something in the air. Jake approached calmly, speaking softly to the animal while the young woman stepped back, instinctively giving space. "Careful," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Jake nodded. "I've got her," he replied. He reached out to steady the mare, his hands firm yet gentle. As he did, his arm brushed against hers again. Both of them stiffened for a moment, their eyes meeting in surprise. The touch was accidental, but it carried an undeniable awareness. "I'm sorry," Jake said quickly, pulling back slightly. "It's okay," she reassured him, trying to smile. "I know it wasn't intentional." Despite their reassurances, the incident left a lingering tension in the air. They continued working, but each of them was now more aware of the presence of the other, of the delicate line between accident and awareness. After finishing the chores, they took a short break near the small creek that ran along the edge of the property. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the gentle sound of the flowing stream created a calm atmosphere. They both sat on the grassy bank, letting the cool breeze wash over them. "You handle yourself well," Jake said after a few moments, breaking the quiet. "Even with the fall and all, you're managing better than I expected." She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that made him notice the curve of her lips and the warmth in her eyes. "I've had a few scrapes in my life," she replied. "But yesterday, that was a bit more than I anticipated." Jake chuckled softly. "Well, it's part of life on the ranch. Things don't always go as planned. You've got to roll with it." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the gentle babble of the creek and the distant sounds of the ranch. The world around them seemed to slow down, giving them space to breathe, to reflect, and to feel the subtle connection growing between them. Eventually, the conversation drifted toward lighter topics: the weather, the animals, and the small quirks of life on a ranch. Laughter began to ease the tension, and the awkwardness from earlier incidents started to fade. Yet underneath the easy conversation, there remained a quiet awareness of each other, an unspoken understanding that their bond was growing stronger. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the temperature rose, and the work became more physically demanding. They moved through the fields, carrying buckets of feed, repairing fences, and tending to the animals. Every shared task seemed to deepen their connection, each accidental brush of hands or shared glance adding layers to the unspoken bond between them. At one point, the young woman stumbled slightly on a loose stone. Jake reacted immediately, reaching out to steady her. Their fingers brushed once more, and this time, neither of them pulled away quickly. The moment was brief but charged with an unspoken emotion that neither had yet learned to name. "You're careful," she whispered, glancing at him with a small smile. "I have to be," he replied softly, "and so do you." They continued working, the day passing in a blur of activity. By late afternoon, they had completed most of the day's chores, leaving only a few small tasks for the evening. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields and painting the sky in warm shades of gold and orange. As they paused near the barn, Jake noticed a small smile on her face. It was subtle, but it spoke volumes. The tension from earlier incidents had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something warmer, softer, and more meaningful. "You did well today," he said quietly, "not just with the animals but with everything." She looked at him, her eyes meeting his. "Thanks, Jake. I couldn't have done it without your help." The sincerity in her voice touched him. There was no hint of exaggeration, no attempt to flatter, just a genuine acknowledgement of his care and support. He felt a swell of pride not for himself, but for the trust they were building together. As they began to walk toward the house to complete the final tasks of the day, they moved side by side, careful not to stumble or brush too closely. Yet, each step seemed to bring them closer, not physically, but in a way that mattered more. The shared experiences of the day, the small accidents, the touches, and the moments of laughter had created a bond neither of them could ignore. By the time the evening settled in, painting the sky with deep purples and soft pinks, they had finished their work. The ranch was quiet, the animals calm, and the day's labor complete. They stood together near the fence, watching the horses graze in the soft light. Jake felt a strange sense of peace. The events of the day, the near falls, the accidental touches, and the shared effort, had brought them closer in a way that words could not capture. He realized that this connection, built through care, attention, and mutual respect, was something rare and valuable. The young woman looked at him, feeling a mixture of gratitude, curiosity, and something she could not yet name. She had come to the ranch for work and adventure, but she had found something unexpected, a sense of safety, trust, and the beginning of a connection that felt important. As the sun disappeared completely behind the distant hills, casting the ranch in soft shadow, they walked toward the house. The quiet evening air carried the scent of hay and earth, and the gentle sounds of the ranch settling for the night filled the space around them. For both of them, the day had been more than work. It had been a series of moments that revealed care, trust, and the subtle beginnings of something deeper. And though neither of them fully understood it yet, they knew that their bond had grown stronger. That night, as Jake prepared for bed and the young woman rested in her cabin, both thought back to the day with a quiet smile. The accidents, the slips, the small touches, they were not mistakes. They were moments that had shaped the start of a connection neither had anticipated, a connection built on respect, trust, and the simple acts of care that made life on the ranch meaningful. And as the stars appeared in the night sky, twinkling like distant promises, both felt that their story was only just beginning, a story that would test their patience, their courage, and the strength of the bond forming between them. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, casting a soft golden glow across the fields. The air was crisp and filled with the smell of dew and earth, and the sounds of the animals beginning their day created a peaceful, rhythmic backdrop. Jake was already moving through the stables, feeding the horses and checking the fences. His mind, however, wasn't only on the chores ahead. The events of the past few days, The fall, the wound, the accidental touches kept returning to his thoughts. There was something about the young woman, something about her presence that he couldn't ignore. She stepped outside her cabin, stretching slightly as she prepared for the day. Her leg felt stronger, the scrape from the accident fully healed, and yet she moved carefully, mindful not to strain herself. There was a quiet strength about her, one that impressed Jake every time he watched her work. Today, like every day, she was ready to help wherever she could, to be part of the ranch's rhythm, and to prove to herself that she was capable. "Morning," Jake called, his voice warm, though tinged with a subtle nervousness he tried to hide. "Morning," she replied, giving a small smile. The warmth in his voice made her feel at ease, yet her heart skipped a beat, just as it had during the moments of accidental contact over the past few days. There was a tension between them now that was gentle, unspoken, but undeniable. They started their day together, moving through the morning chores side by side. She gathered hay for the smaller animals while he checked the fence lines. Every now and then, their hands brushed as they passed tools or buckets, and each time, they froze for a brief second, aware of the connection that was slowly growing between them. The initial awkwardness from the first-hand slip had faded, replaced with something warmer, an unspoken trust and mutual care. During a short break near the creek, they sat on a flat rock, enjoying the sunlight reflecting off the water. The gentle sound of the flowing stream made the moment feel almost magical. They both sat quietly at first, letting the calmness of nature settle around them. Then Jake spoke softly, "You're handling yourself well out here. You really are." She looked at him and smiled a little shyly. "Thanks, Jake. I'm trying. You've been helpful," she added, her eyes meeting his for just a moment before looking away. Jake chuckled softly. "I'm glad to help. It's what anyone would do." Her smile widened and she laughed quietly, the sound light and warm. "Maybe, but not everyone would take care as well as you do." The conversation shifted their focus from the chores to lighter topics, the weather, the animals, and the odd little moments on the ranch that always seemed to make life more interesting. Laughter came easily between them, and with each shared story, each small joke, the bond between them grew stronger. By mid-morning, they moved to the pasture to tend to the horses. One of the younger horses was nervous, its ears twitching and hooves stamping the ground. Jake moved closer to calm it, speaking in a low, soothing tone, while the young woman observed, ready to assist if needed. "You really have a way with them," she said softly, admiration in her voice. "I've never seen anyone calm a horse like that before." Jake glanced at her, a small smile on his face. "It's all about patience," he explained, "and paying attention. You can't rush them and you can't force them, you just have to understand them." She nodded thoughtfully. "Kind of like people," she murmured. Jake's smile softened. There was a depth to her words that struck him. She wasn't just talking about horses. She was speaking about life, about connection, and about the importance of care and understanding. The afternoon passed with shared tasks, laughter, and quiet moments that felt increasingly intimate. They carried feed together, repaired broken fences, and tended to the animals with care. Each interaction, each small accident where their hands brushed, added another layer to their growing connection. What had started as a simple accident with a wound had developed into something more meaningful, something neither of them could ignore. At one point, while moving a heavy bale of hay, she stumbled slightly. Jake's hand shot out instinctively to steady her, their fingers brushing again. This time the touch lingered just a moment longer and they both looked at each other, awareness and understanding passing between them. "You're very careful," she whispered, a soft smile playing on her lips. "I have to be," he replied quietly, "especially around you." The words hung in the air, simple but charged with meaning. Neither knew exactly how to respond, yet both felt a warmth spreading between them. There was no rush, no pressure, just a quiet acknowledgement of the connection that was growing stronger with each shared moment. As the day wore on, the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields. The golden light bathed the ranch in warmth, highlighting the dust and the edges of the grass. Jake and the young woman paused for a moment, taking in the view. The world around them was calm and beautiful, and for a moment it felt as though nothing else existed except the two of them and the gentle rhythm of life on the ranch. "You've changed how I see this place," she said quietly, breaking the silence. "It's not just hard work and chores. There's something else, something calming about it." Jake looked at her, noticing the sincerity in her voice. "It is calming," he said softly. "Once you get used to it, you start to appreciate the little things, the animals, the land, the quiet moments." She smiled, a genuine expression that made his chest tighten in a way he didn't expect. "I think I understand now. And I think I'm starting to appreciate the people too," she added, her eyes meeting his briefly before she looked away. The subtle confession made Jake's heart race, though he kept his expression steady. "I'm glad," he said softly. "You've become part of this place in more ways than one." The remaining chores were completed in companionable silence, each of them aware of the unspoken feelings between them. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, and the ranch grew quiet as the animals settled for the evening. By the time they finished, both were tired but content. The day had been full of shared effort, small accidents, laughter, and meaningful moments. They stood together near the barn, watching the sun disappear behind the hills, feeling the warmth of the day linger in the air. "You did really well today," Jake said quietly. "I don't think I've seen anyone handle themselves as well as you have." She smiled, her cheeks tinged with pink. "Thanks, I couldn't have done it without you." The moment was quiet yet powerful. The trust, care, and connection that had grown over the past few days were now undeniable. They didn't need words to explain it. The simple acts of attention, understanding, and shared work had built a bond stronger than either had expected. As they walked toward the house to rest, the evening air was filled with the soft sounds of the ranch settling for the night. The smell of hay, earth, and animals mixed with the cool breeze, creating a sense of calm that neither had felt before. That night, as Jake prepared for bed and the young woman rested in her cabin, both reflected on the day with quiet smiles. The small accidents, the touches, the shared laughter, they were not mistakes. They were moments that had built trust, understanding, and a connection neither of them could ignore. The stars began to twinkle in the night sky, and the ranch was bathed in silver light. Both Jake and the young woman knew that what had started as an accident was now something more, a growing bond, full of potential and promise, that neither could yet fully name but both felt deeply. And as the night deepened, they drifted to sleep with a sense of calm, anticipation, and warmth. The story of their connection was still unfolding, shaped by care, trust, and the small, meaningful moments of life on the ranch. Tomorrow promised new challenges, new work, and new opportunities for closeness. And both of them were ready, knowing that this bond, born from accidents and gentle care, was something rare and precious, a bond that would continue to grow in ways neither could have imagined. The morning sun rose over the ranch with a soft, golden glow that warmed the fields and the barns. The air was fresh, carrying the gentle scent of hay and earth, and the quiet sound of animals moving about filled the space. Jake had been awake early, as was his habit, checking the fences and ensuring the animals were comfortable. The ranch demanded attention every day, but today felt different. There was an energy in the air, a quiet anticipation that Jake couldn't quite explain. The young woman stepped outside her cabin, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. Her leg was fully healed now, and she felt ready for whatever the day might bring. She had spent the past few days working alongside Jake, sharing the chores and the quiet moments, and over that time, something had grown between them. It was a connection built on trust, care, and small, meaningful gestures. gestures that now carried a deeper significance she could not ignore. "Morning," Jake called, noticing her immediately as she stepped into the sunlight. His voice was steady but carried a warmth that made her heart flutter slightly. "Morning," she replied, a small smile forming on her lips. The days together had brought comfort, laughter, and a sense of understanding between them that neither had expected when she first arrived at the ranch. Today, they moved through their morning chores with a sense of rhythm that only came from shared experience. They worked together seamlessly, each anticipating the other's movements, helping without needing words. The occasional brush of hands or shared glance that had once been awkward now felt natural, even comforting. There was a bond between them that had grown stronger with each passing day. After feeding the animals, Jake suggested they take a short break near the creek. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the gentle sound of the flowing stream created a sense of calm. They both sat on a large flat rock, taking a moment to rest and enjoy the quiet beauty of the ranch. "You know," Jake began, his voice soft, "I've spent my whole life here, but having someone to share it with, it makes everything feel different." She looked at him, surprised by his words. There was a sincerity in his tone that made her heart beat faster. I feel the same," she admitted. "This place has always been a challenge, but being here with you makes it feel easier, somehow better." Jake smiled, the sunlight catching the edges of his face. "I didn't expect to feel that way either," he said. "But these past few days, they've been different. You've brought something here that I didn't realize was missing." Her cheeks warmed slightly and she looked down at her hands, feeling a mixture of shyness and happiness. "I didn't mean to," she began, then shook her head and smiled. "I didn't expect it either, but I'm glad." For a few moments they sat in silence, letting the words sink in. The gentle sounds of the creek, the rustling leaves, and the distant calls of animals created a perfect backdrop. It was a quiet, intimate moment, filled with understanding, trust, and the beginning of something more profound. As the day went on, they moved through the chores together, laughing and joking, sharing small stories from their pasts and learning more about each other. The accidental touches that had once caused tension were now moments of gentle awareness, small gestures that reminded them of their growing bond. By mid-afternoon, they found themselves near the barn, the sunlight warm on their faces. A soft breeze carried the scent of hay and earth, and the ranch seemed to slow down around them. Jake handed her a bucket of feed and their fingers brushed as she took it. This time, neither pulled away immediately. Instead, they looked at each other, a quiet understanding passing between them. "You're really something," Jake said quietly, a gentle smile on his face. "I don't know how to explain it, but I feel happier around you." She felt her heart swell at his words. "I feel the same," she whispered. "These past few days, I've never felt so connected to someone before." The honesty in their voices, the warmth in their eyes, and the unspoken feelings that had grown over the past days created a perfect moment of connection. Neither felt the need to rush, to over-explain, or to force anything. It was simple, genuine, and real. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ranch, they decided to finish the day's chores together. They worked in quiet harmony, side by side, each step and movement reflecting the trust and understanding that had grown between them. The world around them, the animals, the fields, the distant mountains, felt like it existed solely for them in that moment. After the work was done, they walked together to the edge of the property, where the view stretched out to the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of gold, pink, and purple, and the air was warm and peaceful. They stood together, shoulders almost touching, taking in the beauty of the evening. "I never thought I'd feel this way," she said softly, "about a place, about someone." Jake looked at her, his expression gentle and sincere. "Me neither," he replied, "but I'm glad I do. You've made everything brighter, easier, and better." For a few moments, they simply stood together, the quiet connection between them stronger than ever. The events that had started with a fall, a scrape, and a few accidental touches had led to a bond built on care, trust, and mutual respect. It was more than friendship, more than simple attraction. It was a connection that neither of them could ignore. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, they finally turned toward the ranch house. The world around them was calm, the animals settled, and the ranch bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Yet in the quiet of that evening, both Jake and the young woman felt a sense of anticipation for what was to come. They shared a simple dinner, talking quietly about their plans for the next day and the small adventures that awaited them. The laughter came easily, the teasing gentle, and the bond that had grown over the past few days felt unshakable. Later, as they walked toward their respective places to rest, Jake paused for a moment. He looked at her with a quiet intensity, and she met his gaze with equal sincerity. "I'm glad you're here," he said softly. "I'm glad too," she replied, her voice filled with warmth. The words were simple yet powerful. They reflected everything that had grown between them: the trust, the care, the small gestures, the shared moments, and the quiet awareness of something more profound. It was a bond that had started with an accident, had been strengthened by shared effort and understanding, and had grown into something meaningful and real. That night, as they drifted to sleep under the soft glow of the moon and the twinkling stars, both felt a sense of peace and contentment. The ranch, with all its work, animals, and challenges, had brought them together in ways neither could have anticipated. What had started with a fall and a scrape had turned into a connection that promised hope, trust, and the possibility of a deeper bond. The next morning, they would wake to the same chores, the same routines, and the same ranch life. But they would also wake with a new understanding, a quiet knowledge that their lives had been touched by something rare and precious. A connection born from care, trust, and gentle moments that had gradually grown into something neither could ignore. And so, as the stars faded with the coming dawn, Jake and the young woman slept peacefully, knowing that the story they had begun was only just starting. A story of trust, respect, and a connection that would continue to grow, shaped by kindness, understanding, and the quiet magic of shared moments on the ranch.